Hello, everybody. Welcome back to LettermenRow.com. I am Jeremy Birmingham, and this is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast brought to you by Buyers Automotive. If you're looking for an auto, head to buyersauto.com, find out what they got there for you. If you're looking for stuff about Ohio State football recruiting, myself and Zack Carpenter are going to break down a number of Ohio State's most recent offers, the in-state commitment from defensive line legacy Will Smith, and the push towards signing day part 2. So let's get to it. Zack Carpenter is here. I am here. We are here. We are talking stuff. Zack, there's 1 week until the second signing day period, second signing day, whatever you want to call it, finally arrives. And as we sit here today, I think there should be very little drama for Ohio State leading up to that day. So, like, Carson Hinsman's committed. No worries about him flipping anywhere else or signing with Wisconsin at this point. I assume if he was going to do that, it'd be pretty under the radar, but I don't think there's any concern. For a month, we've talked about Omari Abor. Let's just dive in there because that one's the one I think people are worried about or want to know about the most. So still no visits planned for him, right? So what do we do now if you're Ohio State?
Well, first of all, with all these like billions and billions of offers going out to the 23 and 24 kids in those classes, like you kind of forget that, oh yeah, the 2022 class still has a couple loose ends to kind of to finish out here. But like you said, Hinsman, no worries there. But Omari Abor, I guess it's one of those sweat out any last minute visits. I mean, we are in the recruiting live period, right?
Yeah, so, for 3 more days, yeah. And that's why it gets weird.
Yep. And he wasn't planning on coming back to Ohio State at all. So that's obviously not going to happen before he signs. So don't you kind of feel like it's one of those, not that it's out of Ohio State's control, but they already have laid everything out on the table for him. Like we have talked about several times, Ohio State staff is the one that sort of went to bat for him. They're the ones who went the hardest for him for the longest period of time. So now it's kind of just like, all right, Omari, ball's in your court, right?
Yeah. And it's that court, though, the time to get on it is shrinking. And it's oftentimes when you see a player who's from a distance, who's from, a place far away from Ohio, that last weekend before signing day, they find a way to sneak in a trip, right? Whether it's to Texas or LSU, wherever it's going to be that he's interested, Florida, somewhere close maybe. At this juncture, we're recording this on Wednesday morning, 1 week to signing day. There hasn't been any talk from Omari Abor and his camp to Ohio State about a visit anywhere else. So, at this point, I think Ohio State feels like they're in a good spot, but you just never know what happens in college football recruiting, even in 48 hours.
Yeah, I was going to say 48 hours, 72 hours. It's like the finish line, right? It's like that last stretch of the Kentucky Derby, and we're kind of in it. We're in the thick of it. And this has felt like the longest recruiting cycle ever. I don't know if it's felt like that for you, but the 22 cycle has felt like it's gone on for eons.
No, I agree in the fact that what you said, like, I can't believe this is still going on. Like we're talking so much about 23s, 24s, even 25s. Watching them in Florida this weekend, and you're going to St. Louis this upcoming week to see a bunch of, a handful of players over there. But there are some key pieces left in 22 that have to be added. And Ohio State, for that class, number 4 in the country right now, according to the On3 team rankings, like to stay there, they need to wrap this up with Carson Hinsman, Omari Abor. And then there's potentially the cherry on top with Christian Miller, the 4-star defensive tackle from Georgia, who no one really has any idea. I mean, this has been one of the weirdest recruitments that I've ever covered. And it's not because I think Christian's actually doing it on purpose. I truly believe that he doesn't know what he wants to do yet. And I think he's just a kid who really likes so many people and so many different opportunities that it seems impossible for him to pick the right one out of great choices.
Yeah, and he has that sort of magnetic personality, right? He loves when people are drawn to him. He loves sort of that extroverted, outgoing personality where he really connects with a lot of people, just like you said. So I know he just took an official visit to Oregon a couple weeks ago, and then Florida A&M,
and then Miami. Yeah, I mean he's wrapped them all up. So now it's like 3 weeks ago he told me in San Antonio, Zack, that Ohio State and Georgia are the top 2 by a wide margin. Then he gets back from Oregon and says, "Oh, Oregon's right in the mix," and then it's like, "Oh, maybe Miami's the move." Like.
And see, for something like that, I mean, this is like one of those old recruiting adages, I guess, is don't make a decision out of emotion. And the first 48 hours after a visit, you're just so pulled. You want to commit to every school after each visit. I think it was Hero Canoe was one of the most recent guys who told me that. It's like, yeah, the visit's always awesome. So then you're pulled to that program and those coaches. And Christian Miller has had that relationship with Dan Lanning from his time recruiting him at Georgia. So there's an even extra stronger pull there. But don't you get the feeling, even despite the mystery that Christian Miller's recruitment is shrouded in, don't you get the feeling that it's still Ohio State versus Georgia? And I've had Georgia for a long while, and it's obviously going to come down to that relationship with Larry Johnson. Is that enough to kind of carry the day? But don't you still kind of get the feeling? I know it's hard because of how confusing this recruitment's been.
No, I mean, I think that it is those two, and I don't think Christian took these last trips to Miami and Oregon and Florida A&M even just for fun. I think he's legitimately trying to figure out, is there a different path? You know, this is a kid who's from Florida originally, not from Georgia, but he's got a great relationship with Trey Scott at Georgia, the defensive line coach. He's best friends with a number of players going to Georgia, Hakeem Williams being one of them. And the defensive line hall that they have at Georgia is one of the best of all time. I mean, it's crazy. Might be the second best in this recruiting cycle, but it's still one of the best of all time when you talk about Texas A&M and what they've done. But yeah, there is that Ohio State pull in the relationship, not just with Larry Johnson, but the impact of Antoine Jackson at Ohio State, who, even though Antoine won't be there, you know, Antoine's got 4 years of experience to tell him about what to expect at Ohio State. But not just what to expect at Ohio State, but what to expect in the SEC when he played at Auburn for a year and understands how these things work. The Ryan Day relationship with Christian Miller is very real. And I think that there is a part of this where the chance to impact Ohio State's program early is different for Christian Miller than it is at Georgia. And I think that has to play a part in this. The Buckeyes need a player like Christian Miller, 6'4", 300 pounds, extremely quick. You couple him on the inside of that line with Hero Canoe and Tyleik Williams and Michael Hall over these last two cycles, and you have something truly special on the inside of that line. Just dudes who are all built relatively the same, except for Tyleik, who's a little heavier. But those other guys at 6'4", 300 pounds are quick as a hiccup, and you put them all together, and it's a game wrecker in the Big Ten. And Christian's just a guy that I just think he fits the Ohio State personality so well that it's hard for me to discount the Buckeyes, despite the fact that I think a lot of people and people I trust who cover Georgia have told me that he's been a silent commitment to Georgia since September. So, like, how do you balance it? And does that silent commitment matter if it's not public? And I would say it doesn't, right?
I kind of feel like he's a personality fit wherever he goes because he's that type of kid. I mean, he at Ohio State, he would probably be like a BB Landers type where people are just drawn to him. He's sort of a fan favorite. But I want to touch on, you said it would be truly special. They already have something truly special with the four guys they have, stacking on to the four guys they got in the 2021 class on the defensive line. But like you said, and I think he's more of a cherry on top at this point, but pretty big cherry on top. You know what I mean? Like, he's still a pretty talented kid. So he's probably just going to wind up going to Jackson State or something and pull something wild out of his hat, like out of nowhere, right?
Well, I mean, that's what I think. I guess if he would have visited Jackson State last week instead of Florida A&M, I could actually see that. There has been some discussion from folks out in the recruiting world that Deion Sanders thinks he has another trick up his sleeve here as we head into the second signing period. He's obviously already wrapped up Travis Hunter and then took Kevin Coleman from St. Louis, the wide receiver. And now there's some talk that he's got something else working. And hell, I mean, Zach, I'm not going to be surprised if that's Omari Abor. Like, you just don't know right now with the class of 2022 what's happening. I don't actually think it's Omari Abor, but nothing would surprise me is what I'm trying to say.
You just made the YouTube comments and the message forum comments go nuts just with that suggestion.
I know. And I'm sorry.
If you're being cryptic, it means you think something, Berm. So
I'm not being cryptic. I'm just saying, like, anything could happen.
Anything is possible. Kevin Garnett, baby.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it comes down to. You know, and some of the impact of Christian Miller's potential recruitment and potential signing has been mitigated by this week with Ohio State receiving a commitment from Will Smith Jr., who was offered a week ago and then committed 3 days ago on one of these secret visits Ohio State had on Saturday. They had Will Smith, they had Luke Montgomery, they had Malik Hartford from Lakota West, who was offered a scholarship by the Buckeyes, as we talked about last week. And I said last week on the show, I thought it would be a couple days until he was offered, and that turned out to work out okay.
So smart.
Sometimes, they had the defensive lineman, AJ Hoffler from Georgia up, who I put in a RPM pick, a recruiting prediction machine selection for Ohio State. I've done that today for Malik Hartford. I think he'll end up in Columbus. And Zack, we're starting to see just a little bit of momentum. It's been slow and steady since the loss at Michigan. Ohio State really hasn't taken any L's. And that is actually a huge part of this entire process. Yeah, they lost, obviously, a couple of guys at transfer portal, Quinn Ewer's departure, but then they signed, Devin Brown, the number one ranked player in the country, by On3 Sports, in his place. So it turned out okay. And now you have this push. And we have seen with the three new coaches on the defensive side of the ball, with Justin Fry on offense, we've seen Ohio State get very active on the recruiting trail in the last 2 weeks.
Well, I would say first off that Xavier Wampa was one of the L's that they did take. I think that has to be mentioned because of how highly prioritized he was. But I think this goes back with the momentum they're now shifting, or the momentum they're now gaining in the 23 class goes back to what Ryan Day said. I think is either the press conference on signing day during the early period or one of the two before, where he said the 2022 class is our focus all the way through December, and then January and February is really when that's obviously when we start really shifting focus to 2023 class. And you've seen that with all this bevy, this flurry of offers go out, and now you're seeing them bring in, like you said, that group of guys in for sort of a group visit because they want that to sort of be their core, those the names you just mentioned there. So this isn't really a surprise to me that we're seeing all this busyness in the 23 class. And I do think that by the time we sit here in March, when we start going to spring, that is going to start filling up. And then recruiting is all about momentum. Is another one of those recruiting coverage cliches. Once one guy pops in the class, everyone else kind of trickling down wants to secure their spot and sort of lock that up. So I guess we're already seeing movement. I think we probably could see a lot more coming down the pike here.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, a lot of this stuff, especially when you're talking about the 24 class, is really just introductions. It's, hey, how you doing? You are a great athlete. We've seen your tape. You look great. You're down here in Southern Georgia. You should probably come up to Ohio State for a visit. We're offering you a scholarship. And I actually talked to someone inside or close to the Buckeye program who's like, hey, I don't really like this time of year because evaluations aren't really being done on all these offers. It's just coaches having to do that. And it's that having to do it is made doubly important by the fact that you have a handful of new coaches who are trying to build some of that momentum at Ohio State and make sure kids are excited about the Buckeyes program. Go ahead.
Yes. Kind of building off that, I wanted to mention, I had this working theory, and I thought it was pretty spot on, that because of these new coaches, because of Perry Eliano and Jim Knowles and Tim Walton, Justin Fry, like all these new guys, okay, they're at their previous spots, with the exception of Tim Walton, obviously, because he was in the NFL. At their previous spots, they did evaluations of their own recruits. So maybe they're putting in their suggestions for guys that they want Ohio State to offer. And because of a new defensive scheme, that like they're going to want to add more offers for guys who they believe are better fits. So I asked someone close to the Buckeyes program, like, about that theory, and it was shot down pretty much instantly. I'm like, okay, so that theory is kaput. But it was a good thought, right? I mean, at least on paper it was. But I think, like you said, it's more of an introduction. It's more, they don't want to fall behind in this day and age of recruiting, where an offer early means just that little extra bit of momentum, I guess, that little extra inch of a foot in the door. So I think that's more of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, and those offers are designed, especially when they happen right now, as players around the country start to set up spring visits. It's designed to be close to the top of the mind. So say, hey, Ohio State just offered me, I got to get up there and see Ohio State. Because for the Buckeyes to do well out of state, they have to get players on campus early in their recruitment. They generally do not fare very well if you're waiting on someone to get up to visit for an official visit in September or October or November, when it comes to being the only opportunity to see that kid on campus. For the Buckeyes to do well, I'll lose someone like Emeka Ibuka, for example. That's a kid from 2,500 miles away. And Emeka got to Ohio State in February of 2019. I'm sorry, 2018 to see Ohio State for the first time. And that sort of really ramps up the interest for these kids who leave and say, hey, wow, that was actually something that I have to get back to. And I think a lot of times we're dealing with players around the country who are so used to seeing great things everywhere they go, especially in the South, LSU, Alabama, Georgia, A&M. I mean, all these teams have incredible facilities, incredible operations. And I think that at times people assume Ohio State isn't on that same level because they're not in the SEC. And I think it's extremely important for the Buckeyes to get these offers out early so that these kids get up and visit early, because that's when the hay is really made.
That kind of goes back like decades, doesn't it, where Ohio State has this perception because they're a Midwest school that maybe they're, I guess, not up to snuff with some of those powers that be in the South. Maybe that's part of it. I wonder, because of all the craziness of the 18 or 15 month long dead period, that now we're sort of getting back to normal, I guess, as far as like all these offers go. And like you said, trying to get them on campus as soon as possible. Does this kind of feel like old times to you, Mr. Graybeard, for the student coverage?
A little bit. I mean, I think that it's interesting to see how different the perception is of Ohio State now versus then, but also they are fighting that they're not, in the SEC, that stigma of not being part of the SEC. So people in the South think that they're slow and that they don't care about football and their facilities they're not putting money into the program or whatever. But then the people in the Midwest and in the North think Ohio State's just a big football factory who doesn't care about academics or care about having good players or good people. And so it's this weird, they kind of get it on both ends, which is bizarre. And I think, we've talked about it before on the show, but Ohio State right now is recruiting much more against Notre Dame and Clemson than they are a lot of times against Alabama, Georgia, LSU, et cetera. But as the program moves forward and as college football continues to evolve, they're going to have to find a balance of how to compete on the recruiting trail against both of those sides. And part of that is getting ahead with the offers. And you can't be quite as selective as they've been in the past couple of years as far as extending the offers. But you also have to understand that these offers don't mean anything until for these class of 2024 kids, these offers don't mean anything until September 1st of 2023. So who cares?
Yeah. And speaking of those new offers, I mean, you were able to go down to Miami to see some of those guys, kind of get that. I mean, it's early introduction for Ohio State coaches to some of these guys, and it's early introduction for you as well to see that, to get to know them and like talk to them, but also kind of see their game. I know Raul Aguirre, Mark Fletcher, some of those guys were some of the guys that you saw who I guess were like a couple outstanding thoughts from that weekend spent down there, like a couple guys whose game you really liked, getting to know those guys?
Well, I mean, I talked about it last week, the players I really wanted to see, and I mentioned Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Ennis as two of them, and they both stood out to me tremendously, especially Jeremiah Smith. I think he was the best player there, period, as a class of 2024 wide receiver. I don't know that he might be the best receiver in the country, regardless of class right now. His size, his speed, the way he catches the ball, you're talking, he reminds me of like AJ Green, I guess is probably the comparison I'd come with. AJ Green when he was a younger guy and a healthier option, and in his early part of his career in Cincinnati and at Georgia. I just think he's going to be phenomenal. Brian Hartline would take a commitment from him today. He would have taken a commitment from him 6 months ago if he could. So that's one that is like real. Brandon Ennis, I was just excited to see him in a competitive setting against like competition. And he was explosive. He was dynamic with the ball in his hands. He showed a lot of burst that I didn't know he had. But more than that, when the South Florida Express got beat and upset and knocked out of the tournament earlier than anyone thought they would have, he was flat out pissed off. And I thought that was the best thing about the whole weekend. I want to see a player in that setting where it's just sort of a lot of pomp and circumstance still want to dominate and win no matter what. And that's what I saw out of him for the first time. And so that was actually like, if on Berm's personal, list, like he moves up on my list because of that.
Is that you're talking Brandon Ennis?
Yeah. I just thought that I saw a fire out of him that I think is extremely important to have. that I wasn't sure if he had. I wasn't, he's one of these kids who's really, really popular on the 7-on-7 circuit. And sometimes those kids have a tendency to be a little bit diva-ish. And I wasn't sure if that was his personality or if he was this, I'm going to, fight you until my hands bleed type. And seeing that he was the latter was a big plus for me. So that's like on my scouting report, like that's a check. That's a plus now for Brandon Ennis.
Right. One of the intangibles, right? And I think one of the reasons that you didn't see that before is because he did camp at Ohio State this summer, but he was already sort of had his mind made up that he was going to commit to Oklahoma. So I think it was one of those sort of a trip to get some extra work in and to make a trip with like some of his guys who are all making the trip up to Ohio State to camp there. So I wouldn't say he was going through the motions because a 5-star receiver is not necessarily going to do that, especially not in front of Brian Hartline, but in front of the Ohio State coaches. But I guess maybe that competitive fire wasn't necessarily there. You would have to compare and contrast that because you saw him at both events. But that was kind of my take when I saw him camp up here was sort of even though it was a big day with a bunch of high-profile cornerbacks and defensive backs there, he didn't, I guess, go all out at times, and now I guess that's that worry is put away, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's a little different. You never know in those settings. I thought he looked a little lethargic when he was in Columbus, and I didn't know that he didn't stand out to me ahead of any other receivers that day. Not to say he was like bad or that he wasn't, a sensational prospect, but maybe that was travel. Maybe he was fatigued from flying all around the country over and over. I don't know, but what I saw out of him this past weekend was different. Hakeem Williams, who is a wide receiver at Ohio State, visited last week, played on the same team as Brandon Ennis. And I thought Hakeem Williams, and I just, published a story on Lettermen Row this morning about 5 players I think Ohio State should offer from that Battle 7-on-7 tournament in South Florida. And Hakeem Williams is the headliner of that group, 6'3", 200 pounds. You're talking a kind of one of those rare, raw, freak type wide receivers that Ohio State just doesn't have. And I think it's important at this juncture for Brian Hartline to be able to expand the options a little bit, because the longer it goes with Carnell Tate, the more I think that the importance of playing early to him is rising. And if that's what is the most important thing to Carnell Tate, then it's probably not going to end up being Ohio State for him. And I think that that's a discussion he's going to have with Brian Hartline soon. And I think Brian Hartline will need to be very upfront with Carnell Tate about, hey, you've been my guy, you're my guy, but I can't wait forever. Ohio State's not going to get caught in a position with its pants down and say, hey, we don't have options. So Brian Hartline's really out there active and aggressive recruiting other players right now. And I think it's what he has to do. There's certainly a lot of players that were impressive to me there. Another one is Jalen Brown, the wide receiver from Gulliver Prep in Florida, who kind of reminds me of Chris Olave. His size, 6'1", about 170 pounds, extremely smooth. He's a 10-6 guy in the 100, not like a burner, but 10-6 is plenty fast. But he doesn't have like that frame that you look at and go, man, that's a Big Ten wide receiver. I actually think he might be a better cornerback prospect, but he doesn't want to play corner. But I know he said he was been in touch with Keenan Bailey a little bit, and we'll see if Ohio State moves there.
Quick. So,
go ahead. Sure.
Like you said, try and put more eggs in more baskets because already lost Zachariah Branch to USC. Looks like Carnell Tate don't want to. You need to branch out, I guess, to different prospects and stuff, and that's why you see, I guess, Noah Rogers, Jonah Wilson, a couple recent receiver offers. You've talked about in the past. We both have of the receiver that Brian Hartline kind of likes to go after, sort of all in that same body mold, like that 6 foot, 6'1", that can kind of move outside and inside. Is that what you're seeing from these new guys in this 23 cycle? Because that's how, with the exception of Caleb Brown, the 2022 receiver signees are all sort of that same body mold. Are they gonna kind of go into that same direction again in the 23 class from what you've seen?
Well, if you look at Rogers, if you look at Ennis, if you look at Rico Flores out in California, who might be one of the top prospects on the board for Ohio State right now at wide receiver from Folsom Mountain, California, like these are all the same type, as you mentioned. So they're in that 6'1", 6'2" range, 190 pounds. And you want to have guys that are twitchy, but you want to have guys that are big enough to go out and win on the outside. So, yeah, I mean, guys like Carnell Tate, who's a little taller, and then Hakeem Williams, like I said, who's 6'3", are a little bit of an exception. But at this point, it's about finding good players. And you look at the roster, and you're trying to balance it. You know, we talked like about coaching alignment and on shows before about how you want to have this coach to do this and this coach to do this. Positions are the same way. That's why a guy like Mark Fletcher from American Heritage, the running back offered by Ohio State last week, is important. Because if you look at the other running backs on the roster and then you stack him next to a 6'2", 230-pound Mark Fletcher, who looks more like a Brian Robinson type at Alabama, one of those big just sledgehammers, you need both. You know, you have to be able to provide both parts of the offense. And so it's all about balance, really. And you have a guy like Caleb Brown. There are other smaller receivers out there Ohio State's still looking at. One of them I saw in Florida was Ryan Niblett from Texas. Extremely fast. He's like a 10-3 guy in the 100. Blazer, but I think he might be a little too small and maybe more of a gadget player than a wide receiver. I think that being a wide receiver is a mentality, and I think there is a different approach for kids who are just get me the ball any way you can types, which I appreciate. And I certainly see the value for that in offenses. If you look at like Tyreek Hill, for example, I mean, get him the ball any way you can. When you're that fast, get him the ball. But Tyreek Hill is also rocked up and 215 pounds. And, you know, he's not slight, not a guy that you think, man, I don't know if that guy can take a hit type. So there is a balance for sure. And in Ohio State, there's a lot of players. And I've written a lot about the guys in the last couple of days on Lettermen Row and talked about them in the Letterman Lounge. Talking about it now on Talking Stuff presented by Buyers Auto, that were on the ground in Florida. I'm going to see a lot more this spring. You're going to see some coming up here in St. Louis as you go see Christian Gray, who was in Florida, is a guy you're seeing this week. And, you know, I think he's one of the more interesting prospects in this cycle right now, Zach, because we just don't know what's going to happen at cornerback for Ohio State. The relationship with A.J. Harris is restarting. We'll see how that really plays out as Florida and North Carolina surge. So Christian Gray is a kid who is pretty important at this point. If, and that's the big asterisk, right? If Tim Walton and Perry Eliano say this is the guy we want.
That's Christian Gray sort of provides a perfect microcosm, right, of this 23 recruiting, especially at cornerback, but sort of just overall of one coach who's been at Ohio State, who has been building a relationship with him for so long, is now gone. And now you have the new coaches who, not like we keep saying over and over again, or maybe just I keep saying over and over again, it's not just do the coaches believe he's a scheme fit and a talent fit? It's, are they a personality fit? What, like, does this kind of square up? And that's what is still sort of TBD, I guess, on Christian Gray, which is something I'm really excited to go and kind of get his thoughts of in person over in St. Louis this week, because I want to know, like, how's that going? What's the personality fit? Do you see, are Tim Walton and Perry Aliano, this new staff, are they sort of someone you could see yourself playing for? Or is it just, maybe it's too soon to know that because it's just more of an introduction? And he also, the extra dynamic of his old coach at DeSmet, Robert Steeples, is now an assistant on the LSU staff. So, and Christian Gray just got offered by LSU, 2 weeks ago. So that adds an extra dynamic too, of now he's getting pulled in different directions. And I know Notre Dame also has a good in with him. So
what's interesting here, Zach, what's crazy,
I'm really interested to find out.
I don't mean to cut you off, but what's crazy is that Ohio State is in this position where they have to play catch up, so to speak, not just with him, but a lot of other players, A.J. Harris, as I mentioned. But the interesting thing is that all these other schools that are recruiting them are doing the same thing because they all have new coaching staffs. I mean, if you look at the A.J. Harris recruitment, and that's certainly one we followed closely here, and I know a lot of people around the country don't think Ohio State's really a contender in that battle. We do and have for a while. If you look, LSU changed coaches, Alabama changed coaches, Clemson changed coaches, Notre Dame changed coaches, Ohio State changed coaches. So that's why North Carolina, who hasn't changed coaches, is sort of slowly but steadily becoming, I think, the favorite to land A.J. Harris. And then you have Florida with the momentum from Corey Raymond, who's a guy that he knew at least from LSU at Florida. Now that's gaining momentum because it's still always about the relationships. And so Ohio State is a bit behind here, but they're not as far behind as they would be in a normal cycle where the coaching carousel hadn't gone, crazy town, banana pants.
Yeah. I don't really have much more to add to it.
It's wild. It's wild. What else we got going on? Jackson Arnold, who I think was Ohio State's top quarterback target in the class of 2023. He committed to Oklahoma over the weekend. I don't think the Buckeyes are out of that battle yet. I think they're going to keep pushing for Jackson. I think he is their top quarterback target in that class. But it's interesting to see where they go from here. I watched Nico Iamaleava and Dante Moore this weekend in Florida. They were both pretty good at times and pretty okay at others and pretty bad at others. So it was a weird weekend for quarterbacks. I didn't see anyone really stand out like consistently. I thought the best quarterback that I watched was an unranked, unoffered 2024 quarterback named Frankie Weaver from Maryland, who was the quarterback that knocked out Brandon Ennis' team, which had Cormani McLean and Cedric Hawkins and Damon Fagan and a bunch of other highly ranked defensive backs. He's the one that knocked them out and was absolutely spectacular when I watched him. But I don't know at this point, and we have a lot of time to talk about Ohio State 2023 quarterback recruiting, but it's being talked about on the Lettermen Lounge, so I want to dive into it a bit. They're just not hurrying. There's no reason for them to rush into saying, oh, now we got to find another quarterback.
Berm, you don't know what they're doing in 2023 quarterback recruiting. Arch Manning. Oh, get his name in there. Like Beetlejuice, say it 3 times. I bet you're going to be excited to have to answer the Arch Manning questions over and over until he finally makes a decision. And it's not going to be Ohio State.
It's quite possible. But I don't know. I don't think it's going to be Ohio State for Arch Manning. Let's just be clear. I do think that Ohio State's just in a position where they have no reason to hurry. You have one more year of C.J. Stroud. You have then a battle for the starting quarterback in 2023 behind and with Kyle McCord, the likely guy, and Devin Brown backing him up for 1 year. Then Kyle McCord moves on. And so the transfer portal, with the way everything is going on right now, like why would Ohio State need to panic and find a 2023 high school quarterback that isn't going to be the right fit for them when they're literally going to be able to go out and pick any other quarterback they want in the country in 7 or 8 months?
So, yeah, that's the track record that Ryan Day has now. He's earned that. You still have to kind of believe that even if they wait until November, that they're still probably going to get some high-profile guy, highly ranked guy in that class, or they'll get someone in the portal, because that's been Ryan Day's MO so far. And it's another interesting dynamic is that he's proven, he's shown that he's talked about it publicly, that he wants one of those elite level guys every class, because I think in his words, he did an interview with the Athletics' Bill Landis of, you just don't know. Like, even I don't know. So like for sure, if that kid's going to work out and develop into somebody who we can depend on to run our offense and run our program. I mean, so you have to believe that he's going to do that again at this point, because he's done it 4 or 5 cycles in a row, right? I mean,
yeah, and these players are still so young. I mean, these quarterbacks, most of them have played 1 year of varsity football. It's not a position where Ohio State needs to rush. I mean, think about even on the current Buckeyes roster, Zack. We were talking, what's January 26th right now? We were talking 4 months ago that maybe, people were saying maybe C.J. Stroud's not the guy. Maybe he's not the leader for this team. And now, look, the situation changes completely. And when you're talking about high school quarterbacks, 4 months from now would be May. Ohio State's going to have plenty of opportunities to see these 2023 quarterbacks out in spring ball, throwing the football. You're going to have a lot of guys back on campus for camps in June. That's when the real push is going to be made at that spot. And I think it's interesting because I know in recruiting, so many times we talk about the quarterback being the leader of the class and the dynamic guy to start the class. That's just not going to happen for Ohio State in this cycle, which is all the more important becomes a guy like Luke Montgomery, who I want to wrap up today's episode talking about Luke, because there has been what seems to be an absolute push for Ohio State, really for the first time, to make sure that Luke Montgomery knows that not only do they want him on in their team and on the program, or in the program on the team, whatever. This last couple week stretch is the first time we've really seen the Buckeyes go kind of all in on Luke. And I don't know if it's because they feel like they have to now, because Michigan and other schools are starting to really kind of surge, or if it's just now that, hey, 2022 is behind us, let's move on to 23, and Luke, you're our guy.
Yeah, and I thought it's been important all along to get him in the class because he's built up so many connections with in-state guys, national guys, and he has that perfect like that presidential prom king personality that's sort of magnetic, just like the Jack Sawyer in his class and CJ in his class, to be the core leader of that group. And I know Ohio State a few months back was making that push to say, hey, get in the class, man, get in the class so that we can start building this thing. And he just kept putting it off of a decision. Like, not that he was right around the corner of making one, but
right.
He did keep putting it off and trying to sort of look at all angles here and look at all his options. And I just think, I think he would be the perfect core leader of that class. But if he's not making a decision around the corner, then the core of their class might already be intact by the time he makes the decision. But we'll see. I guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah, the expectation for right now is for Luke to make a decision at the end of the spring, so sometime in May. That's pretty much always been his timeline, at least since November. That was originally his timeline, was end of November. Once he got to November and things are up in the air a lot of ways with coaches and stuff like that, it's just, hey, let's push this off. And there is another dynamic with Luke that I think has to be considered, and that's everywhere Luke goes on a visit, it helps his brother also, and it helps Ryan get some more exposure and gets people to see him as a young quarterback. And those two things are not mutually exclusive, but it does help. And I think that there is some component where Ohio State and other schools around the country just realize that the Montgomery visit tour also includes Ryan. And so that is part of what's going on. But for Luke, I think you'll see official visits taken in the spring. I'm pretty sure we'll see Ohio State. I don't even know if Ohio State will get one of those, to be honest, because they probably don't need to. He's been there so many times. Now, maybe he would take one in June. If he did commit to Ohio State in May, maybe he'd be there on the big, commitment weekend like they've been doing the last few years. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see him out at Oklahoma and USC and maybe Clemson, and maybe Penn State, maybe Georgia, who knows, one of these schools that he hasn't got to a lot of times for his officials. So, I mean, everything's still up in the air there, but I do know that Justin Fry and Ryan Day have made a huge push there in the last 2 weeks, because so is Jim Harbaugh and the entire Michigan staff. And it's just going to be fun to watch, right? That's why we like recruiting. So much stuff happening.
So much stuff, such a busy time. And I got nothing else to add for these fine people watching and listening. So you take us home, big dog.
This is it. I mean, we got 1 week to signing day, folks. Lettermenrow.com. You can follow myself and Zack on Twitter. He's at Zack_Carp. I'm at Berm. We just like to talk about stuff, and we like to be presented by Buyers Auto, and we appreciate you being here. Go to lettermenrow.com, sign up for the On3 Network, join us in the Letterman Lounge, rate, review, subscribe, do all the things that you do for people you like. If you don't like us, you could just hate like us, I guess. That's fine too. Thanks for watching. See you.